fishbowl one, it's like seeing every.
Oh, you did, Tony. You did. Okay. Yeah.
Are we supposed to mute? Are we supposed to star 6 and mute?
Hi, sorry for the delay. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to just do a quick presentation and overview of the last workshop that we had and discuss about our plans moving forward on the next version of the ordinance. And I'm not sure about if you have comments on Microsoft calling in, if they need to press star 6 to unmute. There's like, I see. Okay, so I will do my best to coordinate this meeting as well as possible. So thank you all for being here. My name is Megan Acevedo. I am a planner at Planning and Building and Long Range Planning. And we did have a first workshop on April 18th at the Planning Commission hearing. And there was a lot of requests for having a more informal meeting to have a more widely open discussion and allow people to discuss what they'd like to see, their concerns a little more in length. So that's why we had this meeting prepared to open it up to more public comment. So let's start off with some of the issues that we want to address from the first draft of the ordinance. I will bring up that there's a lot of requests involved in allowing these types of development in rural areas on ag general zone properties and timberland production zone properties. We do have outlined in our current general plan what the intent of those lands is for. And for ag general, it is mostly for agricultural and farming purposes. So as the general plan stands now, it's not really an appropriate site for large developments or having multiple housing structures. I think for right now, in the current general plan and zoning code, there's one residence allowed on ag general. And similarly with timberland production zone, as of now, the intent for those lands is for the production of timber. And we also want to keep that timberlands and the forests protected. So that's another reason for why that's not currently the intent to have these large developments and multiple housing on timberland production zone lands. So. People? Do you want to look at the slide?
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Apologies.
Are you all in comments through, or we like to have a period at the end where we can make comments? Okay.
I have a few slides to go through, not too many.
Hopefully we'll get through the slides quickly and deal with the combinations.
Apologize for the technical difficulties. All right. So, In order to address the topic of allowing tiny house villages and emergency housing villages in ag general and timberland production zones, we would have to look into amending the plan for changing the intent of those zones. Some other potential hindrances in permitting sites in very rural areas would be connection to water and sewer and the availability of having septic on site. And also the existing roads are not really adequate for that type of traffic in some areas. At the last planning commission hearing in the workshop, we noticed that there was a bit of confusion in regards to the different sections of the ordinance that was drafted. There was a tiny house village section, which was really to address permanent housing and to potentially provide and encourage affordable housing by lowering the requirements for development and just allowing people to develop sites that don't require as much permitting and as much materials, etc. And the emergency housing section that I had included in the first draft of the ordinance was more to address emergency sleeping cabins, which can be used for providing emergency shelter to houseless people. And we included what I call the dependent unit village, which provides a model for emergency sleeping cabins that would provide an area with a bedroom. Well, it's pretty much like a studio with a bed, a desk, electricity, and some heating. And those are the minimum requirements for an emergency sleeping cabin. So we've decided that for the next version of the ordinance, we would like to separate these sections out to make it more clear what the intent is for each ordinance. So the tiny house village section or tiny house village ordinance will be mainly for providing affordable housing, not just for the homeless, but for anybody in the community that can't find affordable housing. But it could be also incorporated into a model. Let's say if a nonprofit wanted to have tiny house village as the permanent housing for anybody coming out of a transitional housing site. And then we're going to have the emergency housing village ordinance, and this is going to be more of a temporary housing model. So that's where we're going to utilize the Shelter Crisis Act and what I included as Appendix X, but have now been informed is now called Appendix P in the building code. And so that provides for a much less stringent requirement for permitting these buildings, which would also reduce costs for developers. And then the third ordinance will be for the alternative lodge park, which is going to be for permanent or temporary housing. And that is going to provide a space where you could have a mobile home, a trailer, potentially yurts. I've looked into yurts can be permitted as emergency housing, as a tent. Tents, and then we're going to include cars because that was not in the first draft of the ordinance. And in the emergency housing village ordinance, the emergency housing model and the alternative lodge park model, we will require common use facilities to provide kitchens, bathrooms, showers, at a minimum. It could include other amenities, but those would be the three at a minimum required.
Can the tiny house village have the common areas too?
It could. Yeah, that could be included.
The three areas, kitchen, bathroom.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's fine. Good. I like the
What
thought.
was the third area? You said kitchen, bathroom,
Showers.
oh, and shower.
So I guess toilets and showers and
Okay.
hand washing facilities. So,
Be separate from the housing units themselves.
Yes. Exactly, they would be shared facilities. But typically a tiny house model would have a kitchen and a bathroom. That is the typical model. So tiny house village ordinance, as I said, will provide permanent housing, and will allow for tiny houses, movable tiny houses, and we are looking into also permitting, permanent dependent units, which could, like you just said, provide common use facilities on site as well. The permitting requirements for building code would be a little more stringent than the emergency housing dependent villages. I just want to make that clear. So the emergency housing village and alternative lodge park ordinances will allow for emergency sleeping cabins, traditional housing. That would also include some requirements for the property being owned or leased by the county. And would also need to have affordability requirements, which I do realize was not in the previous draft of the ordinance. And I'm going to include that in the next draft, and potentially provide some alternatives. And an alternative would mean do this or we can do this. So kind of giving you two options. Yes.
You just said that this has to be county owned or city owned. Is this not going to cover any private property?
So if I'm, what's that? It could be an option. We are still looking into the legality of the Shelter Crisis Act and the government code that we have to comply with for to be under the emergency housing and shelter provisions. Yes. But mhm.
Going back a step, but for the tiny house village ordinance, the allowing permanent dependent units, are those sculpted by size? And is that something that you would consider storage? What would that dependent unit be if it doesn't have the amenities?
It's considered a sleeping cabin under current building code.
Okay, with the sleeping cabin?
Or a sleeping unit. Let's
Just a bit.
Is it possible that emergency housing units can have some permanent housing? units? Can it go the other way?
So we are talking about like the alternative lodge park that will allow for permanent housing. I will say that in the event that a shelter crisis declaration is no longer valid, those sites technically would no longer be in compliance. And it's potential that they would need to be cleaned up after a shelter crisis is no longer active in Humboldt County. This is just all kind of speculative of the future. We don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but something we're looking into, something to be aware of.
So that the emergency ones would be limited by having to keep them in shelter, by having it be only on
I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question, I could.
the emergency housing village model for the alternative large fund. Those will only work on public property.
As far as I understand right now, I believe so. Like I said, I do need to look a little further because that's more going into state law. And so,
Let's say owned or leased though, so possibly a private property could lease it to the county or a city
Well,
for the purposes of the emergency shelter.
The county should be very proactive about doing that if they want to have a real mobilized approach to transitioning folks out.
And then.
But then, if this is only for while there is crisis, and it gets shut down after crisis, then what do you do with the buildings that have been repaired during that time?
that is the question that I'm still trying to look into. I will say that, as we all know, the houseless issue it's not gone away. It's only gotten worse. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. We've seen where these expiration dates are coming in and then they extend it another few years. So I have a feeling, it's not, there's no validity to this, but I have a feeling that this could get extended beyond January 2026, which I think is right now the set date for expiration.
That would just be for the emergency. I mean, the tiny house village, that could be permanent, that could be on private property, that, okay.
Yes. And if I could also clarify that, let's say for instance, a nonprofit wanted to do a tiered level where you can have the emergency sleeping cabin and dependent units, and then provide transitional housing support, and then want to transition people into permanent housing, we would allow for all types of housing models on the same zone. And so the developer could come up with their own model for how to do that. And how they would, I've seen other models where they have a membership fee, a monthly membership fee, for certain tiered levels. So that's definitely something they can do.
So this has to be with enough.
Not necessarily, well,
You've said not for profit. a few times.
I have, yeah.
Well, and you're saying developers could do this three-tiered model. Who are those developers? I mean,
Yeah.
a definition of developers. I mean,
Right. So, I mean,
not acceptable developers.
my position really is to provide land use ordinance, the pathway for people to do this. How they're gonna do it, I don't know. That's
Okay.
really up to them. We're trying to reduce limitations, reduce development costs, and make it more widely open for, and I keep saying a nonprofit, but maybe a for-profit, I don't know. But some organization to come up with their own plan on how they'd like this. Yes.
So concern that I have is vesting that in any particular thing, private, nonprofit. Because from my point of view, for over the years of looking at these projects in different areas, it's the community that really needs these opportunities. And the ones that are the most successful are the ones that are actually supported and community-driven initiatives. And people are very successful at moving through them and moving on to permanent housing. But my concern is that the county needs to keep the frame around doing a project and making a spot for all the community to have a place for people that don't have the ability to be housed. Because we see what happens. There's no place for people to go. Most communities want to have people that are from their, in their community. There aren't the amenities or a place for people to be. So I think keeping the thought that it needs to be something that has wide application and is as affordable as possible for communities to work together through their community resource organizations and the community-based organizations, not necessarily big nonprofit.
Right, and I'll just give you one example. I think it's the Square One model in Oregon I looked into, and they received a lot of donations, whether that be workers that came to volunteer their time and their work to develop these sites and build these structures, et cetera, or they received donations from private parties, and a lot of that is what helped them to get up and running.
Yeah, I am talking about the ongoingness so that people in the community can support the people that are in the village community. And I think that's a bridge for people to get back to their families. But it has to be within the grasp of the local community. These are bottom-up opportunities, not top.
Yes. And then if I could continue with my presentation after you're done.
Okay, I appreciate this talk very, very much. I think it's really helpful to have this back and forth discussion. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But one of the concerns I think many of us had with the emergency housing village, or whichever one, that if it depends on it being available, eligible for the lack of restrictions that come along with being, because of the shelter crisis declaration, that it's our understanding that it either is government owned, government leased, or government managed, so that extends it. But here's the problem, the shelter crisis declaration was passed in 2018, and Nessie Wade with AHA had a lot to do with it. It was beautiful community coming together saying, we want there to be an emergency response to the people outside. But in the aftermath, as far as I know, Humboldt County has not committed any land. And they actually, in their, it was very, I don't mean to be mean, because I appreciate everybody's work, but I studied the Shelter Crisis Declaration and then the Homeless Solutions Committee they formulated, and they made it very clear that they were not going to provide anything. So this is it looks great, it sounds great, I think your heart is there, but what about the reality that the county doesn't come forth with these so far? Is there anything you can do as part of your organization or that we can do to kind of get some commitment to do that? Because as it stands, if it depends on it being county owned, county operated, county managed, is it even going to happen? I'm not being mean, but I think it's a real question.
I think that, I'll say that my knowledge is limited,
Yeah,
but how much property does the county own? I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know.
I think,
We could try to do an inventory, these are things that I'm just coming up with, but
yeah, sure.
do an inventory of the property that the county does own, and that way we can see potential sites for this, right?
We have done an inventory,
Okay.
and maybe it's changed. When we started doing this and wanted to declare the shelter crisis, we thought we could use the SB2 zones, which were the principally permitted, already identified emergency areas for people to go in an emergency. You could start using them. And Humboldt County had 1,268 of them listed as SB2 zones. And we reviewed all of them. And they were like thrown on a map. I don't think they ever intended for them to actually be used, but because they were residences, they were businesses, they were all kinds of different things. But when we got down to it, there were about 15 different things that could be utilized, and they were very specific: resource lands, ag lands, the kinds of things that they were not willing to do anything with. And the idea of a lot of these projects that have been successful, when they have been on public property, it's been property that cities or whomever has decided to do it have made of it and done it a very affordable dollar rate kind of thing. But it almost only works really if Sandra entity, the public entity, is totally behind. And it has been our experience since the Shelter Crisis Declaration that it's only gone that way. Now, when we talk about the homeless encampment monies and the kinds of things you could do with that, and create a village, and all the cities have talked about it, sums of money to do that. But when it gets down to that, their peak now is no more SB2 zones and that kind of thing, unless they want to use it specifically. But if you find a private property and you get someone to work with you, then, and so it's really become more restricted than more open. And I don't see that being, I don't see the county being a lot different.
I think from your role, I moved here from the city of Alameda 2 years ago. And they went from a position in 2010, 2013, this earlier time period, very resistant to any sort of changes. In more recent years, they have worked with Oregon, with the different Housing First organizations. I think what you're suggesting actually is an important next step to happen within the government itself, within the county government, to request and inventory the properties that are available. So on the one hand, you are opening up the requirements that would allow housing to be built. You establish an inventory of available properties. There's no question that the county, the government itself cannot do everything, but it would at least give a target and information for organizations and activists to then insist on the use of that property. Problems we had in Alameda was there was a decommissioned military base in the West End that had the least number of arteries, transportation services, and of course, everybody wants the unhoused out of sight. So it's like put anybody who's poor, unhoused, problems, that's where you build the housing. That's where the emergency housing is gonna be. So there is a problem of how to have properties throughout the county for different populations that can better tie in with the communities. But I think certainly a next step. I can also get a name from some of the planning people in Alameda. They're a little bit ahead of the curve where you are about what things could be established. And so it's City of Alameda. And I will get, and they've established different community groups so that people are actually talking and working together. They they established special people to work with the group that when there were medical emergencies in housing, so that the fire department officials are working closely with the social services, are working with the different nonprofit and government agencies. So they've done a better job of kind of linking, so we're not working against each other. But I'll make a note to myself, get names
So I do
and
want to,
provide them to you.
yeah, that would be great. I would appreciate any information you guys can provide to me or recommendations.
Yeah, and we're not trying to be negative. We hope it changes in the
I
direction.
do too.
Okay, so thank you.
So, and I do want to just make it clear that the county is a very large organization, so I'm only one part of that. I'm planning a building. We do work with the Department of Health and Human Services, which could all, collaboratively, we can work together to try to find grant funding. But those communications need to be had with DHHS before I can make any strong commitments on their behalf. So, I will go into the next slide. So here are some potential additions to the future ordinances. This is in response to public comment that we received on the first draft of the ordinance and the first workshop and some of the recommendations or requests from planning commissioners. So we're going to include cars and alternative lodge parks, for renewable power source with battery backup. Include some language on what transitional housing support facilities would be required. And I have looked into the allowance of yurts. Those are not allowed as permanent housing structures, but they can be allowed as emergency sleeping cabin models, or I guess I should say they fall in line with membranes and tents. So that is something that we could allow somebody to sleep in. We're looking into the potential for a grandfather clause. I don't really have too much on that. I apologize. But, and then also including that only 50% of the required parking be required per sites that are within a half mile of transit stop.
Can you just speak really what you mean on the grandfather clause of what?
So everybody knows, well, most people know about the yeehaw. And so that was one of the things that came up at the last workshop.
So like dealing with existing places.
Gotcha. Sites that are not in conformance and looking into how can we get them into compliance and work with them. Yeah. So those are the potential additions.
Is there any thought of working with, who runs the bus? Okay, I don't know. HTA. Yeah, HTA. Is there any thought of working with them? Because you're saying within a half mile of transit stops. And or extending where a bus might run. Because we're talking about rural. And rural is very different than 101.
That was just in relation to the reduction in the requirement of parking.
I'm thinking that if you're going to be in an area that doesn't have bus service, you need cars.
Well, I would imagine if there's housing and people, the transit people would definitely look into having service because there's people that need service,
Yeah, definitely something we can reach out to APA about. This is my last slide, so I'll just go through this one and then we can continue the discussion. So here's just some potential alternatives for the next ordinance. Having a low income requirement. As of right now, in the draft that I had, there was no requirement. And as I said, to include that it needs to be on county, or city owned property or leased property. There was discussion about the density requirement for tiny house villages, which was 20 units per acre. And we can remove the density requirement and allow the developer to figure out what would be appropriate. Or we can allow for a density bonus. We have already an ordinance that's called the density bonus ordinance, which allows for you to go over the cap for units per acre, so long as you can provide affordable housing, which would be low income and very low income. So that's another alternative. And as I said, the parking requirement, there was some discussion around one parking space being too many parking spaces. And so I'm looking into saying one parking space for every 2 to 3 unit. And we'll see what people have to say about those. And then we also have common use facility requirements. There was another discussion about the requirement of having 1 toilet for every 2 dependent dwelling units, and that would increase the costs and wasn't necessarily necessary. So we're looking into maybe requiring 1 toilet for every 4 units. And same with the shower facilities. There was comment about having one bathing facility for every 4 dependent dwelling units was maybe too high and not necessary. So we're looking into having 1 bathing facility for every 6 dependent dwelling units. So that was my last slide. I'm gonna add some more people soon. Also, I apologize if you called in, you'd like to speak, you can press *6 to unmute.
*9 to raise your hand, *6 to mute or unmute.
So I'm gonna go to somebody online here. We're gonna go to Tina.
You can press *6 or you can unmute her.
Tina, can you hear us? Oh, there you go.
I think she has to unmute.
This is my first hybrid meeting.
Wow.
Tina, are you there?
Oh.
Okay.
Tina, if you're there, you can press *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, well, I'll keep an eye out. I want to make sure that I give everybody a chance to speak. But I think we can just open it up now for discussion. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. I'll just wrap that. I guess one of my questions had to do with the density and the number that you guys came up with, 3 to 20 per acre. And I just did a little bit of number crunching, trying to understand, because I'm trying to visualize like what that looks like on an acre. And it seemed like there ends up being a lot of wasted space. Cause like, so there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. If you divide that by 20, that's basically, 2,100 square feet per space. If there's, say it's just a 10 by 20, a small container or tiny home like that, there's 200 square feet for the space, which leaves you with 1,900. If there's a parking space that's equal to the container space, that's another 200, which gives you 1,700 square feet still. And if you take another 200 square feet off of that for a yard space, so you have 3 spaces that are identical, like 10 by 20, you end up with 1,500 square feet per one that's not being used. And that was actually already, I took off 1,500 feet for what you guys require for open space in the space. And so 1,500 times 20 is unused space. And I know there's still like roads potentially or access and some things, but it just seemed like maybe that could be looked at a little bit better to understand. If you know, if you're trying to utilize the space for whether it's crisis or permanent housing, you want to best use the space instead of leaving a lot of unused space. I mean, there could be additional open space or something, but I just thought that would be a good thing to look into maybe.
We could probably go up to 30 units per acre.
And then, I don't know if you want to ask other people. I have some more questions. I don't want to dominate the question asking.
Yes, you in the back.
Thank you. Is this meeting just for tiny home development or is it for emergency? Kids are gonna go homeless in a couple days.
It's-
And the things to be done, to prevent abatement. Junk. Trash.
Yeah, so I think you didn't see the beginning of the presentation, but no worries. The previous draft of the ordinance combined the tiny house village and the emergency housing villages and what we're calling alternative lodge parks, which is kind of a mixed style. And what our plan is to separate those out into separate ordinances so that the intent of each ordinance is clear. And the tiny house village model will be just for permanent housing that will fall in line with just normal building code requirements. And then the emergency housing will be for transitional housing, sleeping cabins, emergency sleeping cabins.
So there's no emergency, that's saving people immediately gonna go homeless. After avoiding abatement. I personally have 8 kids I've been looking out for. All that kids off my street, now they're in the house, that's gonna get abated. And they just need to not be abated, just clean up, so $2,000 for effort. It's not an emergency budget for here. Is there different?
So we're not actually discussing funding right now. So I do apologize that that's,
He gave it to the emergency. It is. an emergency.
I understand.
Okay.
We can continue conversations with other departments and other agencies to look into available funding. But that's not the information that I have today, so I apologize. Yes, you in the red shirt.
Okay.
I sorry for taking so long. You had your hand up.
Pardon me, I'm new to this, but is there provision or any discussion? Pet friendly, the housing is going to do, I raised that because that's an issue. Not going to a housing situation, unless they can bring their own.
So I will say that I don't have a provision in the ordinance for that. I think that will be up to the developer or organization that would run the site.
Management.
The management, yes, maybe that's a better word to use. Thank you. Pat, sorry. Sorry.
I did miss part of the meeting here, but is there a projected timeline for it? Please, available. Or I
So right now, I'm working on developing the pathway for these sites
Okay.
to allow people to apply to the planning and building department for permitting these sites. And we are looking into, we're gonna go back to the planning commission on June 27th to discuss these items, and I'm gonna bring forward a new proposal to them and some alternatives, and we're hoping to have this approved by July. which then would allow people to apply in August. Yes.
I wanted to say first, I think it's really important. I love that you guys like we're having a conversation and you're separating it out into the different ordinances. I feel like what I'm hearing here is a lot of people are really interested in the emergency housing component of it. And it almost seems like you need to have like some separate conversations specifically to those because there's a lot of confusion as to what applies to which and where there can be overlap or how you can utilize one or the other to make something work. It was just a suggestion to maybe think about having specific, and then, of course, I imagine in each ordinance, there's gonna be a lot of duplicative stuff, right? But at least when you're having a conversation, you're just talking about emergency housing, or you're just talking about tiny homes, and you really dive into what you're looking for that specific thing, and then bring it all together at the end and or something. I also wanted to just point out, because I watched the first meeting, and I heard some of the comments about, people sound like people were concerned about the ag land and the use of ag land in regards to probably acknowledging that people in tiny homes want garden space. And I think it's important to just probably realize that a garden space would probably be more like a common area in one of these things, and not, you don't need to have like ag designation or ag use to be able to have a garden area in some of these developments. So just, I mean, there might be other intentions with the ag use too, but I just want to point that out so that people can see there's still possibilities to have that available without having to have an agricultural zone.
There are villages, however, that have their own farms and they feed themselves and their community. So those are things that are entirely possible, and people that I know that are in houses love.
Maybe there could be some kind of way to make sure that like an open space is allowed to have that kind of use if it's for this kind of development, like say, like an open space can be used for farming for its own use.
Right, so in an ordinance, just to throw it out there, we don't typically say, oh, you could do this here and this here and this here. We just say, this is the part.
That's what I'm saying, people know that they're able to use it for this purpose, like if they're doing a tiny home village, they can designate either part of the open space or in addition to the open space requirement as a farming space or garden space, depending on how that's defined and whether it's, just for use of the residents or whether it's for commercial purposes for them to use money for to support the thing, whatever it is, yeah.
So that's the same question, same question, not about that, but in terms of self-sufficiency. A lot of success, and as you can see, there's a community first in Austin and Oregon, and a lot of their examples, really good examples of how people have what's required, like in the emergency housing, required facilities, as to the kitchen and so forth. But can you have facility that's common, that's larger, that can be permitted and also like a workshop for people to do their
Like the home kitchen use, like a tiny home might not have space for the home kitchen use, but maybe there's a common area where people could be
Community.
scheduling time to do whether it's kitchen or a craft area or something.
Most places have like a workshop with tools where people can actually fashion, and they actually do have services that they provide for their communities. Through bicycle repair, through equipment repair, through all kinds of things, because they have that available.
Oregon also has like a tool library. Like where there's that kind of thing, there's stuff donated and stuff. Can I ask one more quick question?
Yeah.
You used the term on one of the last slides of dependent unit village, but that wasn't one of the three in the beginning. Is it an alternative of one of those? Or is it included in one of those, or what was that one?
So that's more the emergency sleeping cabin.
Okay, so that would be part of the emergency housing village or
Yes.
component, okay?
Yes, it could potentially also be a part of the tiny house village model.
Mhm.
It's just that the building requirements for permanent housing without using the Shelter Crisis Act are more stringent. You have to meet Title 24 Energy Code. You have to have sprinkler system.
Right.
There's a lot of things that make that more expensive to build, but it's an option. It's something we can add in as an option.
Can you add that to the emergency housing? Potential for rolling over to permanent?
I will, yeah, I will look into that. I don't know that the emergency housing, I've seen because there's. I have my notes here. They're called community. I have notes. So, drawing a blank on the term that's used. Community bridge. Bridge housing.
Yeah.
Yes.
That happens in a lot of places. And
Right.
You say what that means.
So. No, you're fine, but I think that the length of stay at a community bridge housing is between 3 and 6 months.
It depends, like the problems that we have with, the emergency situation. The crisis is different because we can have. If you go by state law for emergency shelter, it's always been the case, we only have 6 months to do that. And that is insufficient for anybody who's coming out on homelessness to be stable. The time frame is usually more like 18 months to 2 years. Some people will only be there for 2 months and gone, or a month and gone, but for the most part, people, I'll send it to you. I meant to send it to the commissioners. I will send it to the commissioners too. There's a study that came out in Oregon where they looked at some of their very successful places that are mass housing in these small structures, where 62% of the people who came in actually got on the permanent housing in a 2-year period. But the reason that they're successful is because, and why a lot of people are not successful, is because when they're coming out of homelessness and going into housing, they can't be responsible, they can't take care of themselves. They need a lot of physical issues, they can't take care of themselves and take care of their dwelling. And then they tend to lose their housing. So they're very, if they have a voucher that's gonna run out, it's still able to do that stuff. So there's a lot of consideration.
Okay, I will look into if we can modify that from the state code. This name, Tina. You try to think of it again? Tina, if you're still there, please hit *6 to unmute. Go ahead.
I just, want to really ask a question about the.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
You can. You can?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it's a miracle. Okay, so, well, I'm just super excited because I've been looking in Oregon. My sister lives in Oregon, and I see it's called Square One News, and they have different villages, different ones, and like for example, one's happening since 2013. It's called Opportunity Village. It has 30 units. It's on 1 acre. Another one's 2018 called Emerald Village, 22 units on 1 acre. So they've got 3-4 more going, and one of them's on 3.5 acres with 70 units. And there you can go online and put in info at squareonenews.org and just scroll down and look at these centers. They have everything. They are they screen the people before they have to do a criminal background check. It's not like an emergency. They take part of whatever services they're getting, and they pay anywhere from $250 or $300 to $550. They have to participate. The county owns the land, but they lease it to the trust. But they lease it for $1 a year. It's like, and the units are like $2,000 to put in, and they start with donations. In the beginning, they had to have $98,000 for one place, and they got donations, and then they have volunteers that do the construction, and it's $2,000 for each unit. They have doctors, they have counselors, they have a garden, they have everything there. So that's kind of the thing I'm looking at, because it's not just for people that need to come in and have a roof over their head. It's for people that are under income, that can't afford the regular rent, and they need a place to live, and they're homeless, and they have to also, remember, they have to contribute. This is not just like a free thing. They vote on things. They have to attend the meetings. It's a whole structured thing. But I would just love to see Humboldt County do something like that. And when I did talk to somebody at the Planning Commission, they said that it sounds like a contractor would have to be involved with that, and I don't really know. But anyway, I just wish you could take a look at that, and I was going to go ahead and make some photocopies and send to the Planning Commission just to take a look at. And then also the second thing I wanted to know is I'm on a half an acre in McKinleyville in the county, and I was considering wanting to put a tiny home in my backyard. And I didn't know if this meeting was also about that, or if it's just, but I just don't want to see containers on cement somewhere that we're just going to put people in, and, there's nothing else happening for them. They're not participating. They're just kind of like in and out. There's not the screening, there's not the medical, there's not the counseling. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have a chance, please do check out info@squareonenews.org. Thank you so much for letting me talk, and have patience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
I,
Tina.
Tina,
Tina.
did I? Oh, wait.
Can I finish my question? Yeah, so, I'm trying to figure out applicability, and obviously, I do have something I'm looking at in a project, and I'm not clear on, with current zoning, is there gonna be an overlay zone, or how can we find out if, it might apply to a parcel where we could potentially look at developing some kind of, tiny home village of, I don't know if it'd be what capacity, but it's something that's currently zoned residential.
Right.
And it could be multi-parcels, but it's limited, I think, to 5,000 square feet per residence. Which means that, we're talking about, you could have several tiny homes on a 5,000 square foot, or even the whole thing's 2.5 acres. And so how can I guess, where would I look to or find out or speak up to say what I don't know that would be oh, yeah, you could potentially do this here because we're working on making able to do that?
Yeah, so first, to address what Tina said or asked about, tiny houses you can put them on a property now under the ADU ordinance. So that's already allowed. That pathway is already existing. So this ordinance is going to specifically address multiple tiny houses on one property. So it's gonna open up and make more clear what people can do in what we're calling a tiny house. We do have these in the current draft available in residential zones and some commercial zones. I know that we have it in RS. That's residential suburban. And we have it available in R2, which is residential 2-family. R3, which is residential multiple family, and R4, which is apartment professional.
So if it's RS 20, that means that it's residential. You said you're looking at R spaces, but the 20 means that they have to be 20,000 square feet or more. Right? So is this gonna be something where if you're zoned that, you could potentially do multiple tiny homes because it's residential, even though it's supposed to be only one residence per 20,000?
So yeah, let's see, at a density no greater than allowed minimum parcel size in the zone, or as may be modified by so. So that depends on the land use designation.
Is that what the RS is? Or is that different?
That's the zoning. That's the zoning, yeah, so, there's residential low, and then there's residential medium, and those are land use designations. don't think
Where
that's
do I
in
find
this
that out?
table. The county website, actually, you can look up all of our code online.
Right? I just saw the zoning. I didn't see a land use. definition, So I
In
didn't,
the GIS, that's both.
like when you click on the parcel, it'll show what that one is too. I must have missed it. Okay.
Yeah, it'll tell.
We have an R3 multifamily property, so would I be able to look on the website to see how we could do a tiny village or look into that, how the spacing and everything? I mean, I totally lost track when she was going through all the numbers. I mean, is there somewhere I could look to see what we could do with our?
We do have resources available. There's the Humboldt County Web GIS that you can search your parcel number or address.
Well, I know that, and I know what our zoning is, but with the tiny village, I don't understand how that could work on that property.
So that's what we're doing right now is we're
Okay,
writing. it.
I'm used
Right, exactly.
And then I
Yes.
can, okay.
But I feel like what we want though is to be able to give input to make
Right.
sure that we can be, we don't want to get to the point where it's
Right.
done and then we're excluded because we didn't speak up. I think
Right.
I'm looking at.
So if there's something specific that you were interested in, like about that you wanted to make sure that what we're writing won't preclude you from doing what you want to do, this would be the time to talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know where to look for the information when I'm on my own trying to figure this out.
Yeah, and when the ordinance gets approved, it'll get uploaded to the webpage that's designated for the tiny house village on our county website. And there are draft documents already on there.
Is there a difference between the number of tiny houses allowed if they are on wheels or if they are solid on the ground? Same thing.
It would be the same. Their foundation requirements are different. That's the difference.
Well, wheels is the foundation on a wheel tiny house.
So they would have to be anchored to the ground with an engineered plan, yes.
So would all tiny houses have to be on wheels? And they need them?
Yes.
What I think her points just lead right into something I thought maybe nobody would want to hear, but, okay. So I think a lot of people here have heard about Opportunity Village and would like to be able to create something similar. And so, but how do you do it? I mean, why were they able to do it like they did? One of the points is that the city had the idea of having innovative, alternative, affordable housing, and they created a task force and they told them to do it. And then it came around. So the city staff was on board with them from the beginning. But here's the thing I wanted to point out. So I thought, if we want to do something like that, what can we learn from them? So I thought, let's work backwards. And so I thought, what were the costs? So on their site, it said, for example, because we wanted to be affordable for nonprofits, for people who don't have a lot of income, their startup costs were funded with around $98,000. That was in 2013. Well, using a fancy US inflation calculator, I found out that the current cost is $131.39 in private cash donations and small grants, plus an estimated $114,000 in volunteer materials in kind, and that would be $152,000. Okay, and then moving forward into 2016, their annual operating budget was $30,000 with inflation, $39,000. And that was for maintenance, utilities, insurance. And then the first couple of years, they were supported by volunteers. And then in 2016, they decided to add on some quarter-time village coordinator, a social work intern from Portland, a small amount of our executive director's time. Okay, so then the question becomes, okay, I've just lost, I had it just here in front of me. I need to get it. So here's my concern. I love the idea that we like to think that the county's going to suddenly change, which would be wonderful. It would be wonderful. And they're going to make available these county lands. They have not been very forthcoming. My understanding is Nancy went and looked at every single one of them. So, I mean, we've been exploring.
I did that with the city of Eureka.
Oh, and here in City of Regis. Okay, I missed. So I have to find, it was here right in front of me. So just give me a second and I'll explain to you, if I could just have a second here. It won't take me more than a second to find it. Okay, my files, here it is, okay. So, come on now, oh, I see. Yeah, oh, that's right. Okay, we're here. Okay, so then you go into, okay, I wish it was true that this would work with the county, but it's not, we have a wonderful safe parking shelter and it doesn't quite reach people, so we don't want that. So I thought, what can we learn from them? And what I found out was that there was this there's a description of how they ended up being able to create this at such a low cost. And what it really gets down to is flexibility. You know, that you're satisfying the basic requirements for structural strength, fire safety, et cetera, but at the same time, you're being flexible. So I found out that they relied on something called from the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, which was R107, temporary structure and uses. And according to a description of how this was created, they said clearly meant to be that the shelters they were using, the detached bedrooms, the bungalows, were quote unquote clearly meant to be temporary structures and able to be moved. The bungalows were still required to meet code requirements for structural strength, fire safety, means of egress, and ventilation, as defined by our ORSC Section 107. Once they complied with these requirements, the city allowed a great deal of flexibility to help keep costs to a minimum. And I think that's what we would hope the shelter prices would do. But they have it right here in R107. And all structures were permitted as temporary structures, Section 1, R107. So the city relaxed requirements for more permanent construction and extended the time of service with a demonstrated cause. And that's the key, the fact that it's in this R. Okay, so I'm going, but wait, that's Oregon. Could that apply to California? Well, guess what, folks? I just found out yesterday it does. There is a very similar code, only here it's under California Building Code, the exact same wording, the exact same allowance for flexibility. And so it's there, but what triggered it? I don't know. I mean, I think the key is that Oregon wanted to see it happen, you know, the city council. And I feel that you both want it to happen, you know, and I think that that makes all the difference if you can have people, as a team, we're all marching together. And this is great because I feel you would be with us. But that's the kind of thing that it takes. And so I'm ignorant. I want to say, I don't know what it takes to trigger this. Maybe it can only still be in Oregon, but it's the same. I think it's based on IRC.
It's the International Residential.
Right. And yeah, that's right. And so that's what it's based on. And I couldn't believe it. It's word for word. The same one in Oregon is available in California. So if we're not going to be able to rely on the shelter crisis declaration, relaxation of regulations, you know, then it seems like this would be something that we could hopefully incorporate. But I'm at your mercy. I don't really know. I mean, I did this research, but I'm not a planner. I don't know what it takes to make this available to people because I think it could be the transformational issue because I think flexibility equals affordability, you know, because there's so many restrictions, requirements and parking and, you know, all of that make it unaffordable to many of us. And these are the people, I mean, this is where I think many of our hearts are. We know the people who are outside who have been dying and hurting and suffering. And so when we come here and if we're all sounding, you know, antagonistic, it's not that. We just want them to have a safe place to live. We thought Opportunity Village provided the perfect model. And so maybe this is a group I go, where have you been all our lives? You know, just to hear everybody here have the heart for this is so beautiful, you know. So that's my question. I don't know the degree to which it could be applied. And I think typically what I've been finding out with staff, sometimes they say, well, we can't do it, but let's not say that. Let's say, why can't we do it? It depends on how can we do it? Yeah, how can we do it? Yeah.
What do we need to do?
What do we
to be
need?
able to do it?
Right. And I'm also, I don't know, at some point I'm fascinated by everybody's contribution, man. I just wonder what's bringing everybody here to be so interested with their hearts and minds to do something like this is really beautiful. So maybe I would like, before we leave, people could say what brings them here, what they're hoping for, that this would bring about, you know. But I thank you. This has been great, you know.
Can I ask you a question? Have you reviewed all the county properties? Are there houses?
Yes, some of them were houses, residences, some were businesses. Some were lots that were not occupied, but they had intended uses.
I guess what the reason I'm saying that is because we're all talking about having to build infrastructure to have these things work. Ginger and I manage the transitional living house, and we know and we have seen, we've been doing this for a lot of years. And our house, it's called a transitional living house, and yet out of 20 people, there's probably a group of 5 who will probably live there their whole lives. Because they have formed community in the house. And to a lot of people, I mean, I don't want to go on and on about transitional living, but if there's houses already, I know
we or one group of people would be very willing to set it up and run it. Well, it costs money to do that, but it is doable. People can get along. There's some challenges and involved in it, but we have she's on the phone all day getting calls from people.
This is actually a good question, because if you're looking at potential properties, you should include properties like that may be available. Some kind, because it's already it's a facility, you can put additional housing on there. That's where we started out 12 years ago. We've been doing this for 12 years. We brought NRP with you, the author of Tent City Urbanism and founder of Opportunity Village, 3 times to talk to the communities, the city council, the California League of Cities. A lot of people have been on board for a long time, but we have not been able to get Humboldt County on board. And part of what's happening for us is, we work really hard to get the shelter crisis down, and everybody recognizes that we have such a crisis in housing. And it was focused largely around homelessness. When they did the housing element, we were very involved in the 2017-18 approach to that. Figures of what people could not afford. People, 40% of the population in Humboldt County can't afford rent, and they can't afford to buy. And so it's even worse now. This is huge. And I guess maybe what we hope by creating the Housing Trust Fund Homelessness Solutions Committee with the shelter crisis was that we get a response from the county that could actually mobilize the commensurate. And I know we talked about being only one department planning. We're very creative in the county. I've been here for 46 years. I know how much we can do. I know how much talent and creativity we have. But we can do great things, but it should involve environmental health, it should involve planning, it should involve VHHS and public health, social services, the healthcare field, law enforcement, all these different entities that actually have to come together to make all this possible and to get on board with supporting local communities in doing these kinds of things. And there's law enforcement in every community, there's healthcare in every community, there's people. And I'm from AHA, we have the mobile shower program. We go from community to community. So when we're in those communities, we have a great opportunity to see how that organic relationship develops and people support us. They bring us donations, they want help, they volunteer. That's the idea. Volunteers come from the community so they can help bridge the relationships with people that are unhoused to the housing community. But it's a wonderful example of how engagement and collaboration happen because you're in a place, and if everybody, maybe we should just do something to raise the consciousness of all of the departments, because left in the hands of DHHS only and social services, it's only going to go to the same adventures and sure we're going to have all that, but it's going to be done in a really different, really institutional kind of way, not an organic community bottom-up sort of way. And I think that's what's working, because we see a lot of examples in programs now that are not. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't leave you on so fast, but I think it's really important to look at all those possibilities. And I know planning and environmental health are very well, because I've been to all those workshops, and for a long, long time participated in all the stuff about waterless systems so that we could use composting toilets. You got to kind of think about in a simple facility. What about compost? So that you have 3 different composting toilets that serve an area outside, and we still are stuck with the same basic. In order to have a composting toilet, you have to have the capacity to have 2 conventional. So we really need to move our county in some way that it makes such a difference in what we can do.
Along that line, I want to go back. You kind of very quickly went over the timeline that someone asked. So your report goes where? Does it go to the county supervisors? Does it go somewhere else before it goes to the county supervisors, and when?
It'll go to the planning commission next.
Okay,
For decision on June 27th.
I'm sorry, June 27th?
That'll be a special meeting at the planning commission at the Board of Chambers in the courthouse.
Okay, so special meeting then. And then from there, once they approve it, where does it go?
Then it'll go to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, and is that also calendar?
We don't have that date set yet. That depends on what decision the planning commission makes.
Okay, so that's the first hurdle. When it goes to the Board of Supervisors, you mentioned something about July approval and August the new ordinance becomes available. Did I understand that correctly?
Effective is the term.
That is, thank you. Yes.
So long as it clears the planning commission and goes right to the board of supervisors.
So long. Did I
Okay.
understand you that you are also looking at rural, land? Like lady over here said she has a half an acre. Is this part of what we're talking about?
So the ordinance is not saying that you can't do this in rural areas. It's just saying that you have to have certain facilities available or, we are allowing for on-site septic systems, but that's with a special permit because that needs to be reviewed by the Department of Environmental Health. So it's not saying that you can't be in rural areas, but preferably, as of right now, on wastewater treatment facilities. And I guess the only other limitation would be the road access, because you have to make sure that a fire truck can get to the site in the event of a fire. And make sure that trash services are available, et cetera.
Well, we are also, I mean, our whole community is earthquake zone. And yet we have buildings that have been here since the 1800s through earthquake after earthquake. And when a study was done on my property, what was said is they couldn't tell the difference between an earthquake and roads that are making. So are people who are in an area that is labeled earthquake, you're going to be able to do that?
Tiny house on wheels. Wheels aren't affected by earthquake.
Right.
I mean, it's really very different. We really have to consider that.
Yeah, so that I would say yes, that they would be allowed.
If it's in an Elvis, there are certain areas that may not allow multiple residential units. If they're in an area that potentially has an earthquake fault, then there'd have to be a fault evaluation report done to determine where that fault is and make sure that we weren't allowing residential units on top of that. So
That's exactly, yeah.
Just special permitted sites.
it depends on if they're in that hazard area. So we have different hazard areas,
Yeah.
obviously.
So right, we've been.
Flood areas.
But it sounds like the whole thing with the earthquake zone is because there's potential for the foundation to crack.
Right.
Well, if we're
That's
still having an alternative thing where there isn't even a foundation, it seems like it should be exempt from that, even if it's in the earthquake zone, because
It all goes back to the building code and consider if you are on a fault and the fault ruptures. Does it matter if you're on a foundation or not?
well, if the fear is the foundation cracking, yeah. But
Fear is not, well, it's complicated.
I would say too, as a local government, we don't really have any authority over California Building Code. Right. That's unfortunate. We have to follow the codes that are provided for us by the state.
We just need to go to the next level.
I'll go to him.
Okay. Talking to some of them. Here, but I asked her, should I not see? Negative. The church has about half of the city block. Maybe actually it's more than that. City block. That the church occupies the homes. And there's one water, say one water, it was occupied by a Sunday school building, and then the rest was grass and concrete. So you have space that the church is not using, because they're not using the Sunday school. So, let's say that the church decided, we really want to have some kind of housing in that water. To affordable housing. What would you tell the church, what steps do they need to take? Is there any hope that being practical?
I have a question. Is this in the city of Eureka?
Yes.
Then you'd have to talk to the city of Eureka, unfortunately. Because we're the counties, we don't, our regulations don't. The cities have their very own regulations. But I know that they are friendly, so it would probably be a good discussion.
Go ahead. Yeah, so I'm going back to the thing about the land use really quick, because I want to understand, there's like RL, which is the low density, residential low density, and then there's the RE, which is residential estates. And the RE talks about, that this designation is used for lands adjacent to urban areas or rural communities with limited public services, but suitable for single family residents. Also intended as a transition from urban development to rural lands. Clustering policies are suggested to assist in buffering adjacent resource production or open space and retain contiguous open space. It's commonly used for water only service areas. Don't know what that means. But, like, it seems like, because where my parcel is RE, but it's right by the highway, right by the bus line, has roads, has water and sewer right there, power right there, which isn't any of those things. And it's not in an urban to rural, it's not away from services. So is there some way to, like, have, yeah, I guess somehow pursue something like this, because it has all the things that it's saying these lands don't have.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe that might be eligible to be rezoned and reclassified potentially. I mean, I don't know.
But how do I look at that?
You can contact the department.
So that's something I can like pursue on my own, to look at rezoning, even though there's just full rezoning general plan thing done.
You can.
Okay,
I don't think we have access right now to the.
yeah.
And if, one thing interesting thing too about this is that, we have this. We can also look into the section for RS that talks about based on the density and see if that's something we might want to reconsider to allow more units in that case, if they're on community water and sewer in particular, because one of the issues often with, if you have a well and you have septic on site, you need more land than you would imagine, just for the separation between those things. So,
Right.
So we'll look into that for the RS.
Yeah, as I said, I am very appreciative, deeply appreciative of this conversation. I think it's really wonderful. But I think many of us have been to many, many meetings. As I like to, I like to say, I've been to so many in the 90s, I'm pretty much allergic to them. And it has to be a really important meeting to get me in place, but it's true. But the thing that concerns me is, like I said, I'm not trying to harp on it, but it's real. The dependence on the county suddenly change. It would be wonderful, like out of a movie, but so far we haven't seen that shift. And we've been going to their meetings and, over and over, I attended those meetings for the shelter crisis declaration. They had their staff right so that basically the county didn't have to do it. I can prove it to you, So what my concern is, this is great. Yes, I'm sure we are having a good feeling that there's an openness and concern. And I think a commitment, I don't say commitment, but a real, a determination to make this work for everybody. But chances are it very likely won't, or it might not. And so I can't help but think that it would be good to have another step where the people here and maybe some additional people could be part of the creation of it, before you take it to some group that were involved, because, I didn't tell the whole story of what made this work. And it really got down to the building inspector was willing to allow for the flexibility. And that's what had to make it work. So I don't want to see this drift away because, I've been a witness to what AHA's done, and it's out of the movies. I mean, just always showing up, always trying, always doing their best. You know, the North Coast Journal said they would not succeed with the shelter crisis declaration in Eureka because the staff was against it. But no, they galvanized the public, they showed up and they passed it. And the county wasn't even willing to put a shelter crisis on their agenda. So they got a whole room full of people, diverse from the religious community, from, you know, advocates, homeless people, you know, people living without homes. And they showed up and it was like came and spoke from their heart. And they moved them to at least put it on the agenda and then it passed. But they didn't want to, and they did everything they could to not cooperate in making something happen. So the question still remains, what will that take, you know?
So it's a bigger picture in my experience.
Surely.
And no one will talk about this because we talked about it for such a long time. But because we did declare a shelter crisis in Huntington County, and because the city of Utica did declare a shelter crisis, our Caitlin just declared one himself for a particular property. But the idea there is it brings in a lot of resources. The shelter crisis declaration has brought a lot of resources into the county, and eventually the governor declared the same thing, a shelter crisis declaration in 5 counties that didn't do it so that they could get the resources and start moving in the direction. He recently in March gifted Sacramento, San Diego, and Santa Clara counties, I think it was, with 300 tiny houses and dedicated a portion of Cal Expo for them to demonstrate how to make that happen. Cal Expo property. But the point that I'm trying to make is we've been working at this for a long time and we have an opportunity with having a shelter crisis declaration to actually do a lot if the county wanted to mobilize in that direction. It's already brought a lot of money, but it's only gone to specific uses because it's not a general application. So I'm going to continue to be an advocate. It's something that's really remarkable happened. And we were way ahead of the state by years, 5 years before that ever happened. And they said, we have to do this in declaration to get things moving in the right direction. So we still haven't gotten moving and we're getting moving in the right direction. Don't get me wrong. I'm really happy about all this too, but there's still a lot that can be done to help us move as a county better coordinated than just looking towards the entities that I've heard you say this before in other meetings, but and I've heard Director Ford say it too, that when it gets down to figuring out, because in the housing element says that there's going to be some funding made available to do these projects. That's never been forthcoming, but they rely on DHHS because they're a big funnel that sucks in all the money that comes from the state, but it doesn't get distributed and actually be effective or as effective as it could be under the conditions that are.
Yeah. But I also think what's so important, because, you know, again, I've been a witness to what AHA's done. It's like it's out of a movie, it really is. And what they've done right away, they built a tiny house, a beautiful tiny house, you know, what did it cost? Like,
We have a couple. One was about 2,300 and one was about 27.
yeah, and they did it with Unhoused and House working together. And then they had an expo where they showed all the different variety. And whenever there's been a meeting or, you know, North Country Fair, Arts Alive, I swear anywhere they'll go and talk about it. But the thing that's the opposite, and they've proven, I think, by the shower ban, they're very capable of taking a need, translating it into a beautiful service that brings the community together. So, and others here are capable of it. I think that if there's any way that all of us can get together and at least together maybe support a demonstration model of what it would be, it would overcome, because how many more, you know, I would say we're wasting all this paper, reading about all this stuff, writing, bothering all the supervisors. If we demonstrated it, it wouldn't be this hurdle that still exists because they don't want to take a chance on something that's different. And I didn't tell the details again of what this would entail, but I would hope that, you know, I could provide it to you. And it does take a building inspector willing to be flexible. And that's what they had in Oregon. But again, I don't want to see this energy go away because it's beautiful what everybody's saying. I just find it so heartening, you know. But we're going to come into obstacles, and it could very well be one of those great papers that end up on the shelf and don't really go into effect, because we're already struggling with a safe parking, safe shelter problem with that. So I think we need to figure out what can we do so it does move forward and the emergency, most emergency, options go into effect. Because if it depends on the county, there's a good chance. It won't.
I will just say I do agree collaboration is, it'll be a big part of the actual development. I can't speak to my participation in that, but
Oh, you can't.
if it's outside of work time, I'm muted.
Yeah. But that's partly it. You've done a really good job in terms of summarizing what the concerns are, but then it stops. So then what's going to make it go forward? And that's what I think our concern is. And so that you would help us to make something that just has the greatest possibility of actually moving forward and not just being something that sounds good on paper.
And the truth of the matter is, and I love this about the planning commission workshop that happened first, is the recognition that in the models that were developed, presented, that, yeah, you can do 10 houses for $10 million, and you can do 8 tiny houses for $3.5 million. But the reality for communities, people, community-based organizations and people who care about mutual aid and participating, that's a phenomenal sum of money. And if it's community driven and based in the community, that's a huge expectation to put on. And it doesn't have to cost that much, but as soon as you involve all the entities, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But as soon as you get involved with the different layers of authority and how that happens, where you have to hire, that it's flexible, so you have to hire professional level that in other cases, but it gets more and more and more expensive. Do a project is, so you have $700,000 in unit. It's pretty crazy.
I'm wondering if anybody has any other direct comments towards the first draft of the ordinance and some recommendations on some of the alternatives that I brought up. If you have any thoughts in reference to parking requirements, or I heard a lot around parking and a parking space per unit is too many, and like, well, then how many is enough? Is I guess my question. Yes.
I did want to ask about, the thing with the parking and just the way, our society is going towards sustainability and electric stuff and alternative energy, and if there could be any kind of, reductions or exemptions from parking requirements, like if there was not solar, but electric, like say electric car requirements for the housing. And I'm thinking more of like in a tiny home village, not necessarily the emergency housing type of thing, but it seems like, I don't know. I am looking at things out in general, but I think of like what I'm trying to envision, and I envision like, a mixed, all tiny home type of thing, but mixed residency. Like it'd be cool to have seniors in this area, and it'd be cool to have students in this area, and it'd be cool to have professionals where, they're all getting like exposed to each other and potentially supporting each other. But also I see like a lot of seniors don't even have cars. A lot of students where we're at could be riding the bike trail to HSU and don't need cars, or using the transit system. And so, if there was something that was designed kind of be geared towards less vehicles, potentially it shouldn't be required to be accommodating vehicles. I'm not really sure what that looks like, but I'm just thinking possibly.
Good thinking though, because we really need to make as many inroads as we can to cutting down on transportation and gas emissions in our footprint. But the notion of having people in a mixed community of people is a good idea, and sometimes that is because of permanent longevity. So my brother, Texas, for musicians, because a lot of them are impoverished by the time they get to their lives, and in the same community. So that they would have built in here, and they would have to take.
And I imagine other things too, like we're talking about the garden, like I imagine a community where there's a big garden that everyone can use. And that like maybe a community center that everyone uses. And some of them maybe are the bedroom type spaces where there's a communal kitchen, and some of them maybe have their own, all of their own elements. And like with the seniors, some seniors, depending on their abilities and their ages, it wouldn't be ideal to have a 2-story tiny home, but for others it would. So then it's like, well, you want probably more single-story ones and less 2-story ones, but you want the 2-story ones for the other segment of the population.
So what were the two elements that you referred to? Parking was one issue. You said, what did you think about the two
Parking
things?
was one thing that was brought up, and then density requirements was another.
Parking and density,
We
yeah.
kind of touched on that, and the option for density bonus, if we do have a cap, there's, then, and this is, let's say, for a tiny house village and not emergency housing villages, but if you have, let's say, 3 to 20 units per acre allowed, if you go over 20 units, you can apply for a density bonus. You just have to allocate the additional units to affordable housing.
Is that the only thing that gives you that opportunity? And then I guess what's the definition?
Housing is not,
Right, I know that part,
But
but
you're building affordable housing, that's the whole purpose of these villages. So it would meet that criteria.
is this for purchase or for rent? Like, what does that mean? Like, what is affordable in the rent spectrum versus the purchase spectrum?
Even when developed for rental property, correct? As long as you're designating a certain percentage as affordable, and then they work
But is
that
that
out
defined
accordingly.
somewhere?
It is.
It is.
It is.
And this,
In the what?
So it's an acronym. RHNA is RHNA.
Uh-huh.
Regional housing needs.
Needs assessment, yes. So they do assess the local community every so often to define what would be low income, extremely low income. Better.
and right now in Humboldt County, that's like 50% of average median income is considered low income.
Okay.
And when we talk about income housing is for people who have to buy, they have to have a minimum income of $16,000 is capped at $54,000. That's an example, but that's what common. So people that we're working with who want to getting into stability in places, we're not even. So, Governor Newsom, I'm saying this today, Governor Newsom is sponsoring a bill that is for the next Ryan numbers allocation, and which will be 2040. But, and that seems like a long way away, because we've been doing this for 12 years. It's going to actually happen. So that's going to change to be 30 to 50%. 15 to 30 would be extremely low income, and 0 to 15 would be acutely low income, because that's really what you see in terms of the reality of people's wherewithal. And if we don't start preparing for that now, we're going to run right up against it. Not going to be something in the housing development.
in transitional housing, what we have seen is general relief is $303 a month.
And that's not enough for most transitional living. You can run a house to it, or even you can't do it on that.
So I had, go ahead.
And just really quick, is there resources to reach out to look at funding to develop some kind of programs that like people are trying to do, like if there was land available?
I'm not sure.
Is it, I'll look into it. I'm just,
I don't know specifically what
Oh.
resources are out
Yeah, I don't mean to talk too much, but it does concern me, is goodwill is all this is, and I take you with your goodwill. Like you said, it's something that at some point it's done and you kind of can move on, and that's the nature of it. But we're gonna be working with whatever comes out of it. As it stands, I'm not convinced that we can create what would be an affordable, tiny home emergency housing for people here who need it. And I feel as though there's probably some creativity in here. So that, I don't know if there's some way to identify the cost of the different things that are required. Are they required? Because I was at a meeting where the safe parking, safe shelter, and one of the planning commissioners, Noah Levy, brought up, is that really required? Are those required? He said, oh, no, it's totally flexible. So I think that there should be an absolutely every step of the way to figure out a way to make whatever it is flexible, so it doesn't require these high prices. And I don't know if maybe there can be a committee out of this to work with you, because I think the reason that the Opportunity Village worked is because Andrew Heben, who was a co-founder, he was actually an urban planner. And so, and the city wanted to work with him, so they could do this brainstorming and figure out this kind of very creative solution, which most people wouldn't have known about. And we need those kind of solutions, because I don't think we should wait around, like I said, for the county to change its heart. I'd love it if they did, but you know, it's questionable if it will. So isn't there some way that there could be something here that helps to create a process that really will work for people? Because I don't think it sounds like it's going to be affordable, despite your best intentions for low-income nonprofits, you know.
Well, not just low income nonprofits, I think it's really important that the county come up with some way, framing and thinking about this, that they can present an opportunity to communities to be able to make something available to people where they actually came from. That's part of the problem in Humboldt County. You know, 85% of the people that are homeless here lived here before they went homeless. They have family here somewhere. And part of the reason that they're not there is because there's nothing for them to connect to resources, so they gravitate to where they are. But if they were in their communities while they were nearby, that would be a much better opportunity for the connections that everybody needs.
I want to thank you. I think in fact, you are trying to put the bones in place so that when the people that we need in office are in fact in office and ready to move forward, the bones are there, the structure is there. There needs to be the general plan. The housing element has to be written in a way that Humboldt will qualify for the funding that is being made available under the current state government. And the county supervisors are going to look very bad if they aren't taking free money to help solve the problem that everyone's complaining about. So I believe this is a critical first step in actually making as many types of structure, as many types of property be available and be useful. And that's what planning does in this first critical step. So I would not despair just yet.
No,
I agree that there have to be other people that are going to actually vote and apply these laws in a way that begin to bring the solutions needed. But also, do you have a business card? I want to put you in touch with the mayor and some other contacts I have.
There's no whiteboard, but
Can you
there
give
is.
an email or
Yes,
something?
I can give you an email address. It's kind of long. So it's my first initial, my last name. So M Acevedo, MACEVEDO.
I'm sorry, ECO or DO?
V as in Victor,
Yes.
EDO at Humboldt, oh, sorry, at CO dot Humboldt dot CA dot US.
The other thing, there's another concern that I hope there's going to be, working on this when it comes around in 2027. Housing gets redone. Because we've seen, you know, SB2 zone, we've seen detached bedrooms, we've seen a lot of things thrown out that used to be things that were. So I would really like to see there be some commitment wanted to retain. This actually be.
I guess I will throw out one more thing that I thought of, because I know there were a lot of thoughts out there about, well, require this, we could require that, or And then maybe not even require, but as you said, for like a garden space, the agricultural garden space. So that wouldn't necessarily be a requirement, but is that something that you need to say that
An allowance.
in allowance? Okay.
And
So,
space to allow pet, because of a lot of homeless people.
And the question also about having other buildings on a, what, not permanent site.
right.
Workshop.
You did already say somewhere about that you're looking into the thing with alternative energy, right, and solar.
Oh, yes, it's added a provision for that. That's already permissible with the building department. My mistake to not include it in the first draft.
So,
Uh-huh.
point of clarification,
Sure.
where to submit comments online? I was hearing that you said you were gathering feedback.
You can submit comments to me. I gave out my email address. I don't know if you wrote that down.
I got it. I heard you.
Okay.
And then where can we do, do this recording?
I will post this on the webpage. So there is a website. The county website has a webpage dedicated to the tiny house village and emergency housing village ordinances. It's hard to find. It just goes straight to our page. So I suggest doing a Google search for tiny house village in Humboldt County, and it should just pop up. So I will upload this video online.
And are you guys okay? We'd like to share that out on social media, like for.com or something like that. I think that there's, I'm glad to see many people here, but I think that there's really tremendous support for what you're trying to do, and I'm personally am really thankful for all the effort that I can tell that we put in. And I think it'd really be nice if the community had ways to just at least weigh in and kind of support that, what Catherine was saying about it would be a shame to not find ways to take advantage of the opportunities that are here right now, especially the tremendous need that's going on. Just from my heart to yours, thank you very much. And is it okay if we share that out?
I think that's fine. Yeah, if it's on our website, it's open to the public. Yeah, it's public information. And I'll do my best to get an updated draft of the ordinance online as soon as it's approved by my supervisor. And that way you guys can review it before we go to the next hearing.
Yeah.
But that would be ideally your opportunity to provide comments is
Yeah.
going to be.
Yeah, you guys will have.
So that planning commission meeting, there will be a draft available before that and it goes out to the public.
Yes, so we're only required to upload documents. I think it's like the Friday before the hearing. And so I'll try to get these on the website. Maybe, I don't even know when we can, but if you did give me an email address, I can let you all know when that gets uploaded to the webpage. And then I do see one
Is there a
person.
register for this topic where how you can sign up for certain things to get emails when there's updates or things?
So there's a notify me online and I'm not entirely sure how those notifications get sent out. So it's probably best to get on my contact list. So if you didn't put your name and email on that sheet today, please do. And I'll be sure to include you in any emails for updates. I do see one more hand up on our virtual meeting, so I apologize. Frank Richard, if you would like to speak, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
I'm on the Microsoft thing. It's the first time I've done this, so can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so my name is Frank Richards. I'm the chairman of Building Lives, Building Structure, and the training coordinator of a nonprofit in Hoopa. I train people to be carpenters, and we have a couple of homes that are in the modular factory that I'm leasing out. And I'm about affordable housing, and I'm a homeless advocate. And it's nice to see Nezzy on there again. But this meeting here is to, change the zoning ordinances and policies of land use, right? And then it goes to the planning department, they find a chunk of land, and then they have to go through the NIMBY thing of the neighbors don't want that density housing there. Then it gets past that, and then there's a plan, and then a grant or however it's funding happens, and then a large contractor comes in and gets prevailing wage to build these houses. Is this something that, am I on the right track? Because the last meeting, I missed the first part and they wouldn't let me comment on when they started the other meeting. But this meeting right here just seems like it's way before what really happens. What has to happen is we get land, we get money for the building materials, and then we build these structures. And another thing I'd have to advocate for is to create a Habitat for Humanity group. You got a group in the Teen Challenge group that's a bunch of men that are bettering their lives, and just utilize those types of resources. And for land, I mean, don't churches have a bunch of land that they're not using? And I mean, we're thinking out of the box here, right? I mean, what I'm hearing is that we're gonna get bogged down with the policies and the red tape and the bureaucracy, and then this is a seasonal discussion. It's summertime right now, and the longer it takes, we're gonna go right into winter, and that's gonna be the time when people die. I mean, I don't know. I really appreciate all you there at this meeting, and I appreciate what's going on with the homeless people, but who's going to run this thing? Who's going to run the facility? Who's going to pay for the utilities? Who's going to make sure that everybody's safe? Who's going to have build a fence around it? I mean, is there monies for all that? Is there social services programs there? Here in Hoopa, they have to be near services, but there's so many beautiful places out in the, not too far away from town, that why don't the services go to them? Monday they get the TANF, and Tuesday they get the social services, and who's gonna intake all these people and determine their need? There's different types of homeless people, but I'm just advocating for the actual structure and building of it itself, and I know that we can do a better job at that. Even using reused material. I would tear a house down and reuse the material. I mean, I would redo a van or a semi truck trailer. I mean, stuff like that. Rebuild a trailer, take it down to the frame and rebuild it up. Stuff like that. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a really good point though, about materials use. Because if you have to buy brand new timber, you have to do whatever, that makes it absolutely unaffordable for thinking about doing a project. But being able to use recycled materials, that's a huge, huge part of what these people can do.
And even the labor.
Yeah.
Like if it ends up being some kind of federal project, and then you have to hire prevailing wage staff to do the thing, that makes it not be affordable.
The people in the community who provide transitional housing is kind of a subgroup of people. There is no recognition of it. There are no rules. There are no community. It's kind of I've always seen the city of Eureka like the city kind of pretends that it doesn't exist, and those who run transitional living places kind of stay on the down. Yes, I mean, we have fire inspections, and so, I mean, there's definitely some safety oversight, but when you need help, and when the whole thing blows up because you get maybe 2 people in a house who are really drunks and possibly violent, then there's a place where you need help from police and it's not available. Because it becomes an issue of tenancy. And you're held to laws, but nobody's it's complicated, and I'm not trying to go off on that, because there's ways that we really try to build communities so people respect that are in the house. But I know, I want to say before I just say that, I really appreciate what you're doing. And that you're working to change some things to make things available.
In the pathway.
Yeah, making a pathway, and I do think the community of people who care about it and want to do something, need each other. It's been a lot of years since I've come to a meeting. I used to be in meetings all the time. Now it's been, we get the work done.
Thank you for what you do. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think I've been the witness, but there was a point painful point when AHA had the money and they couldn't find somebody available to sell the land. So I think what we're hoping is you really have had, this is a wonderful meeting and your heart seems wonderful in extending what you have to us. Maybe you'd have some influence just by, you would say to people willing to go at it, you can do it. And I don't know, because who knows what's going to break the ice on this. It's been a glacier, level of ice.
Well, and we're here, and it's all coming this way.
Yeah.
When they go back to the planning department, then there's gonna be the push, and then you have to be strong. If you really want to represent some of these ideas, because it's not going to be popular. I've been there enough times, so be strong for the things that are really meaningful and matter.
I am, definitely passionate about serving the people and making sure that we address homelessness. I would say I have to present the facts, and I go to planning commission, I have to be non-biased, and that is part of my job. But I think this is the starting point where we can create the collaboration, where people have interest in this, find those relationships, and that'll be outside of the county partially. And partially the county can be a part of that collaboration in the future.
They should be a catalyst for collaborations, because they're gonna know who's coming and interested in all of that. And it would be a wonderful thing to see the collaboration of a lot of groups that are interested, rather than just the same players that get to play, which is good for them, but it doesn't really address a lot of things that need to get done. And I can't even look at it. It's different kind of, but it's good.
And I think some of the people who, like you and a lot of people here, I haven't seen you at meetings, but you've been there. If you came and spoke, it'd be different people coming with a different heart. It might just open some hearts that have not been, so I'm thrilled by what I've heard of everybody and grateful for this. So I always have hopefulness. Usually that enough, but
It also takes meetings like this to brainstorm and bounce ideas off, because I know that listening to lots of people, and I come to meetings in different capacities of different topics, and it's always other people's ideas that sparks ideas in my head. And I'm like, oh, wait, I didn't think about that. Now maybe this, or how to tie it together. I really just appreciate the sharing of knowledge and experience to be able to build on my own.
Yeah, the 3 minutes you get in a public meeting.
So thank you very much.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.